Hello, and welcome to Caveman Science. My name is Matt, and today we're taking on one of the great mysteries of life itself: evolution. Was Darwin right, or are there different explanations for our origins? To understand evolution, we need to start at the beginning. What exactly is evolution? Evolution is defined as change in the heritable traits of biological populations over successful generations. Evolutionary process gives rise to diversity at every level of biological organization, including the levels of species, individual organisms, and molecules. To modern science, all life on Earth shares a common ancestor, known as the last universal ancestor, which lived approximately 3.5 to 3.8 billion years ago. Although a recent study in 2015 found remains of biotic life from 4.1 billion years ago in ancient rock in Western Australia, when the planet was nothing more than a mere volcanic toddler. Researchers examined tiny grains of the mineral zircon from Western Australia's Jack Hills, and chemically dated them to when the Earth was barely 400 million years old. Inside one of the 160-some grains, they found what they call a chemofossil, or a certain mix of carbon isotopes. Think of this as the gooey remains of complicated biotic life. Biotic meaning relating to living organisms. If life could originate so closely to the formation of our planet, then it is possible to say that the same could happen on other worlds. There's something to rack your brain with. Now that we know what evolution is, and got some knowledge of modern science into the matter, let's break down Darwin's history and his theory of evolution. Charles Robert Darwin, born 12 February 1809, was an English naturalist and geologist. Darwin's early interest in nature led him to neglect his medical education at the University of Edinburgh, and instead he helped to investigate marine invertebrates and began his studies at the University of Cambridge, which in turn encouraged his passion for natural science. After his time at Cambridge, he began a 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle in 1831, establishing himself as the eminent geologist whose observations and theories supported Charles Lyell's uniformation ideas. When Darwin returned, he was puzzled by the geographical distribution of wildlife and fossils he collected over the voyage. This began a detailed investigation, and in 1838, he conceived his theory of natural selection. He was writing up his theory in 1858 when Alfred Russel Wallace sent him an essay that described the same idea, promoting immediate joint publication of both of their theories. Darwin's work established evolutionary descent with modifications as the dominant scientific explanation of diversification in nature. He established that all species of life have descended over time from common ancestors, and in a joint publication with Alfred Russel Wallace, introduced his scientific theory that his branching pattern of evolution resulted from a process that he called natural selection, in which the struggle for existence has a similar effect to the artificial selection involved in selective breeding. Little known fact, Darwin was actually not the first one to originate this theory. Evolutionary theory begins with the Ionian philosopher Anaximander during 6th century BC. Very little is known about his life, but it is known that he wrote a long poem called On Nature, summarizing his research. This poem is now lost, and has survived only in extracted quotes in other works. Enough survives, however, that Anaximander's thoughts can be reconstructed with some confidence. For Anaximander, the world had arisen from an undifferentiated, indeterminate substance called the apeiron, which means infinite, unlimited, and without an end. Part of the poem that survived is as follows. The earth, which has coalesced out of the apeiron, has been covered in water at one stage, with plants and animals arise from mud. Humans were not present at the earliest stages. They arose from fish. As intriguing as this is coming from a 6th century BC philosopher, unfortunately, without the rest of the poem, Anaximander's theory can never be fully explained. Going back to Darwin, he was able to demonstrate the scientific basis for evolution, a concept which he called natural selection. By observing different species, Darwin saw that there is variation in every population, and that within these groups there is competition for limited resources such as food, water, and shelter from predators. The creatures that survive this struggle for existence pass on their favorable heritable traits to their offspring, and because more offspring are produced than can survive, the process of natural selection continues. The process later becomes popularly known as survival of the fittest. Now that we have Darwin's theory broke down, let's look at some of the other theories out there for evolution. The Morphological Resonance theory. Founded by Rupert Sheldrake, a former professor of biochemistry at Cambridge University. A process whereby self-organizing systems inherit a memory from previous similar systems. In its most general formulation, morphological resonance means that the so-called laws of nature are more like habits. The hypothesis of morphological resonance also leads to a radically new interpretation of memory storage in the brain and of biological inheritance. Memory doesn't need to be stored in material traces inside brains, which are more like TV receivers than video recorders, turning into influences from the past. And biological inheritance don't need to all be coded in the genes or in epigenetic modifications of the genes. Much of it depends on morphological resonance from previous members of the species. Thus, each individual inherits a collective memory from past members of the species, and also contributes to the collective memory, affecting other members of the species in the future. If I didn't know any better, this sounds like the Borg. The theory of Panspermia. The first known mention of the term was in the writings of the 5th century BC Greek philosopher Anaxagoras. Panspermia began to assume a more scientific form through the proposal of Jean-Jacques Berzelius in 1834, Hermann E. Richter, 1865, Sir William Thomson Lord Kelvin in 1871, Hermann von Helmholtz, 1879, and finally, reaching the level of a detailed hypothesis through the efforts of the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius in 1903. Panspermia proposes that microscopic life forms that can survive the effects of space, such as extremophiles, become trapped in debris that is ejected into space after collisions between planets and small solar system bodies that harbor life. Some organisms may travel dormant for an extended amount of time before colliding randomly with other planets or intermingling with protoplanetary disks. If met with the ideal conditions on a new planet surface, the organism can become active and the process of evolution begins. Panspermia is not meant to address how life begins, though, just the method that may cause its distribution into the universe. The cosmic ancestry theory, first theorized by Sir Fred Hoyle. It claims that the evolutionary progression from simpler to more complex organisms utilizes pre-existing genetic information that does not compose this information as it occurs. According to the theory, higher life forms, including intelligent life, descend ultimately from pre-existing life, which was at least as advanced as the descendants. The genetic program for the evolution of such higher forms may have been delivered through biospheres, such as the Earth's, within viruses or bacteria, in the same manner as proposed by other versions of Panspermia. The genetic programs may then be installed by known gene transfer mechanisms. Also, according to cosmic ancestry, life initiates Gaian processes that may environmentally alter biospheres. But there are plenty more theories out there, to include creationism, Scientology, theistic evolution, and more, to include my own personal theory. They will have to wait for another episode. I'm out of time for today, but join me next week on our continuation through science. And let me know in the comments below if you would like to learn about the other theories of evolution in future videos. Until next time, Internet, science on.